As you and I think about the concept of passwords, and we think about just for a minute how a typical user deals with and remembers and handles passwords, it's a scary proposition from a security perspective because let's see if any of these sound familiar. These are all experiences I've had with either myself or people I've known regarding passwords. Some people might keep them in their contacts list, in their email application, and they have a contact that they have all their passwords in. Maybe the user is called passwords, and it's all there in plain text. Or perhaps we have somebody who has a document that's stored on their computer or on their phone that has a list of their passwords. Or somebody who has cards, physical cards, which are, keeping each of their user accounts and passwords all sorted, and they need to use it. They sort through those and they put them in. Well, there's lots of challenges with all of those. Now, at the same time, we tell our users, okay, you have to use these complex passwords, with the complexity involved, and we enforce that with technical controls, and don't use the same password twice, and don't use the same password in more than one location, because if they're shopping online at some retailer and they're using the same password there as they are for the corporate network because they don't want to have to remember multiple passwords, if their password gets compromised online at the shopping location, then the hacker could potentially have that same password and try it in other locations. So with all of that in mind, what is a person to do? Well, many years ago, using a password manager was finally brought home to me where I say, I need to do this. I've been in security for a long time. I hadn't been using a password manager. Several years ago, I decided to do it. It changed my life. A password manager can help us in ensuring that we're not using the same password everywhere. It can help us ensure that we have passwords that are complex and hard to crack, and we can have a password manager, which is the solution to all this, for individuals with one master passphrase that unlocks all of the passwords in that password manager and gives us the ability to have it backed up so that we don't have to worry about if we lose a device or if we lose a file, we don't have to worry about losing all of our passwords. So what I want to do is chat with you in this video about the benefits and the importance of individual users using a password manager. And I found that an effective way to help encourage users to use a password manager is show them how devastating it is if they're using weak passwords or if they're using the same password across multiple sites. And one great site to go to is haveibeenpwned.com. And so to get here, I just did a search for been pwned, and I came up with these hits. And the reason it's important to get the right URL is because there's a lot of mischief going on in the internet. And so if we type in something we think is the right website, but it's not, we could be actually installing malware or a site that we don't think it is and cause potential harm. So this site, haveibeenpwned, PWNED.com, is a great place to check to see if your email has been compromised in one of the thousands of security breaches that have happened over the last decade. So if we go to this website, haveibeenpwned.com, and then we can put in our email address as a test. I'm going to use johndoe@yahoo.com. And if we scroll down, it gives us a nice laundry list of where that has been compromised. So here's the key. If somebody's using the same password at multiple locations, and then they get the password from one of those locations, they can then try to use that at other locations as well. And so an attacker, when they get a password, they might test it to verify whether or not that password works other places, and then they could go ahead and sell that on the dark web or elsewhere for a few dollars, and then the attackers can buy that database of usernames and passwords and have a good time with it. So the way to solve this is to not use the same password at multiple locations, and a way to help control that is to use a password manager. And one of my colleagues, Sean Powers, just wrote a really great blog article about password managers, and I'd like to go ahead and use that as a reference here. So I did a search for Sean Powers Password Manager. Sean does a lot of our great Linux training at CBT Nuggets. And so with that in the search window, if I go down and I find his website, there it is, The Brain of Sean, The Thinks I Think. If we click on that link. Now, Sean is primarily focused on Linux, but many of these password managers will work on multiple operating systems. And some of the things that are important to me for a password manager is multiple devices, so that I can have it on my smartphone, whether it's Android or iOS. I can have it on my computers, whether they're Mac or Linux or Windows. And recently, I set up my father on a new iMac computer. He's used Windows his whole life. Now he has a new iPhone, a new iMac. He is 90 years old. And I set him up with a password manager. And it is the best thing ever because all of his user accounts and passwords are all now synchronized in his password manager. He has one passphrase to get into all of it. And then he can just click and go for all the sites that he needs. And it has a checker to make sure he's not using the same or simple passwords across all of his logins, which is fantastic. So as I talk to people about security, the one thing that's going to make a huge difference for most users is to start using a password manager to manage all their passwords that they're using across the board. And one of the questions I often get is, you mean if somebody gets into the system, they have access to all my passwords? The answer is yes, they would. But what we can do is we can use additional authentication techniques to get into that password manager, including multi-factor or two-factor authentication. And that, my friend, is the topic for our very next video. So I'll see you there in just a moment. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you. I hope you're going to start using a password manager, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.